Question: have you ever had power supply envy? Me neither, until recently. And this is a linear power supply that I bought a few years ago. It's a pretty unassuming little unit really, but it's quite an interesting one actually on the inside. There are two R-core transformers which are powering, hopefully you can see there on the rear, two 5-volt outputs, and this linear power supply can deliver about, I think, 3 amps of current. So it's suitable for powering maybe a DAC or an audiophile network switch or something like that. So here in the UK it gets 230 volts in but only 5 volt out. And this is a pretty standard, get the cables up, ATX computer power supply, a cheap one really, and you can see it has lots of different cables for powering lots of different things inside a computer, and that's really important. And ATX is a conformity standard really that was developed by Intel back in the 90s, I think in 95. And this is a switch-in power supply, and switch-in power supply technology has lots of advantages such as efficiency or the power it can deliver from a small size. And one of the big things about computer power supplies is that it needs to be able to power or provide lots of things with different voltages, 12 volt, 5 volt, 3.3 volt. And that's really important because the motherboard needs lots of different voltages. SSD drives need 5 volts, the CPU needs 12 volt, and if you're using a mechanical hard drive, well then that needs 12 and 5 volts. So really, computer switching power supplies are used again for efficiency and the fact that they can deliver lots of different voltages. And that's where things get really very interesting for computer audiophile enthusiasts, because when you test a good linear power supply versus a standard switch-in power supply, in my experience and a lot of other audiophiles, the linear power supply sounds better. But there are drawbacks to linear power supplies where switch-in power supplies have a big distinct advantage, such as with power and current and voltage delivery with efficiency. And about 5 years ago, I bought this. This is heavy. I really used to think that this is a beast actually of a linear power supply. I used to think it was a real beast. Wow, I wonder if you can see that. So this is, excuse me, itchy nose. This is a linear power supply, the first linear power supply that was designed with computer audio playback in mind. So this is an ATX linear power supply, and inside there is a big R-core transformer that's really heavy, lots of capacitors and other bits and pieces. So if I turn it around, you can see there are computer ATX kind of power outputs. And I've been using this for about 5 years, and I've been mostly very, very happy with it. I'm going to put it down, sorry. What I didn't know is it's not a fully linear power supply design. A few weeks ago, this box arrived, with inside being the world's first fully linear ATX audiophile computer power supply. And as you can see, the box is huge. And inside the box is some substantial packaging. But as you can see, when we compare to that existing computer linear power supply, the one that I just showed you, this new one, the JCAT OPTIMO S ATX, is more than just a little bit bigger. In fact, it's enormous, bigger and heavier than a lot of amplifiers, and this is just a linear power supply for powering a computer music server. Pretty wild. But this is not just a big box for the sake of it. This power supply has been years in development to achieve a certain level of performance for low noise with stable current delivery with tuning for sound quality, and it's the world's first fully linear ATX computer power supply. And that is a big deal because in the modern hi-fi arena there are a lot of manufacturers making and selling computer-based music servers with linear power supplies, and You don't really need me to name drop the names, but what's interesting is a company that you might not be as familiar with, such as JCAT, they are really looking to push the boundaries here of computer audio based music playback, and I have to really applaud them for that. And as we look at the rear, things are more interesting because on one side are a set of computer ATX power supply connections, such as the 24-pin for the motherboard and 8-pin for the CPU. But on the other side, we have two independent outputs, one for 5 volt and one for 12 volt. So the OPTIMO S ATX is acting as several linear power supplies in one, which makes it very versatile and diverse and really quite interesting for maybe using it to power other things outside the computer too, maybe such as DACs, or I'm thinking Chords Hugo M scaler. Exciting. And even though it's this big, it has several huge custom toroidal transformers that are magnetically and electrically shielded, more capacitance than a lot of big amplifiers, it's not huge in terms of watts power output compared to, say, modern gaming computer power supplies that can deliver maybe 1,000+ watts from a box about this big. That is why switching power supplies are used for the power delivery, because of the efficiency, but it can deliver a very high amount of amperage, 23 amps, which is a lot, more than enough to comfortably power, modern computers with audio playback in mind. It delivers about 500 watts of power, which again is comfortably enough to deliver or power, modern computers, but not enough to power huge, graphics card with high-level gaming in mind. This is not a linear power supply designed for that, and I think that's very important to point out. And really, it's the ability to deliver really clean, stable power consistently, which is the reason it's so large, because there is a lot of heat sinking needed. So it reminds me of a pure Class A type of power amplifier, and we all want one of those in the system. But I need to be careful saying that, because one thing I was expecting was for it to run quite warm or maybe even quite hot, but it didn't in here. It ran pretty much stone cold, much cooler than the old linear power supply. And one thing that stood out to me straight away is the exceptional build quality. Every OPTIMO S ATX is hand-built in Poland to order and comes with a set of cables. And firstly, the cables are immense compared to what you normally see even from audiophile power supplies. But importantly, they are still flexible. JCAT say they are using as thick gauge cable as they possibly can, and they are using very good quality materials. The cables are shielded, and there is a little connector that allows you to earth or ground the shield back to the earth ground of the power supply unit. We have not seen that before. But the best bit for me was, and if you've ever built on then taken apart a computer, you'll totally understand this. When you try and take apart the cable connections within a computer, say that big 24-pin from the motherboard, it's usually such a ridiculously tight, snug fit that you end up kind of wiggling the connector and then kind of pulling on it, and eventually you kind of tug it free, and you're amazed that anything ever works after that. It's a horrible experience to cable up a computer, and then it's worse to take it apart. And it's been the same for me for every computer that I've ever built. We're talking decades here. So to me, that's just how it is. But it's not how it is, and it's not how it's supposed to be. Because with the OPTIMO S ATX, the cables connect and you can remove them really easily. And it just goes to show, I think, how crappy the connectors are that are usually used with, every other computer power supply. And, it's not supposed to be like that. This is how it's supposed to be. You're supposed to be able to, remove these really easily. So trust me, this is a difference that you will appreciate. Let's quickly talk about setup and installation. This is the inside of my dedicated computer music source that I built a few years ago. And I appreciate it's messy and dusty, and a lot of it is covered with an EMI absorbing material from 3M. But underneath it all is some seriously good bits. And one thing I think it is important to point out to you is that at the end of last year, I reviewed JCAT's OPTIMO Nano, which are a great affordable product for cleaning and improving the power quality from any power supply. And you can see I am still using them and will continue to use them for this review. And the installation process was pretty simple. It's just a case of connecting the power cables from the OPTIMO ATX, all normal standard stuff if you know how to build computers. And for testing sound quality, I really wanted to know how much difference, how much better would the new OPTIMO ATX be compared to the linear power supply that I'd been using, like I mentioned, for years. So I wanted to keep the test as like for like as possible. So I decided to only use the exact same connections that I was using previously, which meant only using the ATX connections. And my initial first listening impression was that my system sounded like someone had taken a cloth with a strong detergent and, like a window cleaner, removed the glaze that was on the glass, stopping me from fully looking in. And I know that is a cliche, but that is just my first initial impression. But as I listened more, I really noticed the fact that the treble within the soundstage was much more present and clear and easier to hear and appreciate the detail than it was before. And I don't mean brighter, I just mean clearer and easier to hear within the soundstage. Maybe the treble had more pop. So details of cymbals and other higher frequency information was presented more clearly. And there was definitely a more open and spacious soundstage. Vocals sounded a little further back and definitely sat in more space, which is always great for me because I don't have a lot of space. But interestingly, music sounded cleaner and more open, and with a more spacious soundstage, but also with a lot more energy to it. It sounded larger or grander with some music, or maybe more attacking or more impulsive with other music. And I could hear where if the room was wider, I think I would have been in for something even more exciting. But as it is, I was really enjoying the fact that music was presented that bit more cleanly. All music was presented that bit more cleanly. And as a result, there was definitely more precise placement, more precise image specificity, I think that's the right way to explain it, of sound elements across a soundstage, or instruments across and deep, depending on the music aspect to the soundstage delivery. And I've really enjoyed that bit actually, because that's part of what this new listening room setup has been able to give me, that more kind of spacious sound. So anything that enhances or improves that, I'm really enjoying that. And I had to remember that I have been setting up HiFi systems in this listening room using the old linear power supply for years. So I'm very used to that sound, or setting up systems based on that sound. So I actually went back to the drawing board a little bit and made some changes. And changes for me means adjusting how I set the system up with Dirac Live, and also making some settings changes for the Singsa SU6. And after spending a bit of time on this, I was able to unlock the next level of sound quality from my HiFi system. So bigger and better bass, a bigger sound overall with much more resolution, clarity and energy. And what's interesting for me is I think the OPTIMO S ATX is a product that I would likely appreciate more over time, once I've had time to adjust to what it's done and then readjust how I set things up in this room to achieve better sound from HiFi systems. That's all part of the journey, and I really feel like I've probably only scratched the surface, and that is really cool because up until this point it was always the mindset of you need lots of different linear power supplies powering individual things. So it's nice, it's a big box, but it's nice to, I suppose, have one box that's capable of doing more, capable of doing, I won't say everything because it's not always that simple, but doing nearly everything. And I'm definitely inspired to put those 5V and 12V outputs to good use. And I think that is a nice way to move on to what does the JCAT OPTIMO S ATX cost, who is it for, and are there any negatives? Well, firstly, the cost is €5,175, and that includes worldwide shipping. So it is a fair old chunk of money. And initially it seems like a lot of money for a linear power supply in general terms. But I think it's really important for me to stress to you that this is not a general linear power supply, far from it. In fact, the 6 or I think maybe 7 other linear power supplies that I personally own, none of them are comparable. None of them are even even remotely comparable to it in terms of the performance, in terms of the design, obviously the size and the way it's been developed. So yeah, it's definitely a product that is definitely in a class of its own. Regardless of this is clearly not going to be a product category or price level of product that's for every audiophile. And you're also going to need to clear some space for it, because for me that is the only real potential negative, the size. But who is the JCAT OPTIMO S ATX actually for? Well, interestingly, this is a product that is for me. It really is for me. It's for someone who is a computer audiophile, who's got a real passion, who's probably, been on this project or been on this journey for quite some time, and someone or is an audiophile who really wants to push the sound quality of their system, of their source, to the limit, to the absolute limit. And that's definitely me. You can put me in that category. I'm speaking to Marcin of JCAT about the potential customers for the OPTIMO S ATX. He feels it's likely to be an audiophile who's already got a very good, very well set up, high performing HiFi system. And this power supply will obviously unlock a whole new level of potential. It will remove a strong, significant bottleneck from that audiophile's system. And I think if you're lucky to have, a big, very good hi-fi system in a good sized room, well then, great for you. And this will, after listening to it, will definitely do that for you. It will definitely remove that major bottleneck. And I have definitely heard enough positive already to know that it is for me, and it would be very easy to convince myself, to want and to buy one of these and to add this to my system. But I have to think back to when I first started. If you are a newcomer to serious computer audio at the moment, and this is like a project that you're interested to go on, when I think back to when I started, which was probably about 10 years ago, there was nothing on the market like it, absolutely nothing, not even close. And when I think back to maybe the last 5 or 6 or more years, when I think about how many different linear power supplies I've actually bought and used and tested and compared, and then another 5 or 6 different battery power supplies and options, all of those, every single one has now been surpassed. I've still got most of them. Most of them are just kind of sitting around gathering dust. So, if you think about the cost of all of those, bundle that all up into one, it's probably about the same as what you would pay for this. And I think that's really exciting, because if you're starting now, you're already starting at a significantly further forward point than I have been able to for the last, maybe even 10 years. And, it's a great position to put, or great position for someone to be in to start with. And yeah, it's a big initial step, but it's a big investment in the sound quality of your system. So yeah, I'm kind of convincing myself, I've already convinced myself that, yeah, this will be a product that's definitely for me. And as a result, that means I need to start raising some funds for it. So I won't be starting a GoFundMe page, but if anybody knows someone who's looking to buy a part-used kidney, hopefully you can put them in touch with me. But yeah, hope you enjoyed this review. Hope you found it useful, interesting and helpful. And yeah, if you enjoyed the video, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the Pursuit of Perfect System YouTube channel if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.